Yo, what's going on, guys? It is Fox United here, and welcome back to a brand new video and another episode of the F1 debate for you guys today here on the channel. Today, we are going to be reviewing the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. So if you guys have enjoyed today's video, drop it a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here as well, and let's get straight into things. As per usual, I've got all the notes and everything that I need on my phone because, you know, as I do, I ramble onwards. And as I always say at every single F1 debate video, if you guys want to put your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below, obviously feel free to do so. I'd love to hear what you guys think. First things first, that was an amazing Grand Prix that we witnessed last weekend. And if you didn't like it, why? Is probably the best thing to sort of come up with that. It was a brilliant race weekend. I think we saw, you know, I mean, starting with Friday, I think we saw Red Bull we thought would emerge as, you know, a contender again with Verstappen going fastest in FP1. Then we get into FP2 and I can't remember who was fastest in FP2, but it looked quite competitive across the entire grid. We got into FP3 and then Mercedes were then the quickest in FP3, and then we get into qualifying and then Leclerc's on a different level. We get to the race and then Charles Leclerc is insane in the first stint, and then Piastri comes at him in the second stint, and then the two of them just battle away, and it was brilliant. That was street racing. You know, that was some proper street racing, you know, and like you do when you play like your Forza or your Gran Turismo, if they have any street tracks on there, but you know what I mean. It was a proper street race. I loved it. It was absolutely brilliant from the get-go. The whole race weekend was brilliant. And it just shows that this season of F1 2024 is just getting better and better and better. And it just keeps getting more unpredictable each session. You know, and I think that's what we want. We want to keep seeing this. And the fact that we're seeing three drivers in three different teams really battling hard against each other with Piastri, Leclerc and Perez is something that we just want. It's what we want to see. It's what we want to be enjoying. It's what we want to have fun with. And I think the fact that we're getting that is just, yeah, it's so refreshing to see after such a horrific 1.5 years. To be honest, if you combined it, 2 years of Formula One, you know, from the second half of 2022 up to the Miami Grand Prix of 2024, you know, F1 was in a really shit place. You know, we had Red Bull just on another level. And I said it, you know, when I was doing the F1 debate videos when Red Bull was winning. You can't deny that what Red Bull had been doing was exceptional on the highest level of just brilliance, you know. They were putting in performances. You know, the car was incredible. Verstappen was on another level. The strategy was on point. Their pit stops were always the quickest. And when you've got all of those things going for you, it just works. And this shows that now that we're getting into this bit of Formula One, every single detail counts. You know, you can't have a bad pit stop like we saw Verstappen have in Austria because it put Norris on his tail. You can't have a bad strategy, which McLaren have done multiple times, i.e. Silverstone, because that will lose you a race win. These minor details mean so much, and it's great to see. I think it's refreshing, it's amazing, and we just go into a race weekend not really having an idea of who's going to be where. We know who's going to be at the front of the field, and we pretty much will label McLaren as the favourites each time, but we don't really know too much beyond, well, we think McLaren should be the fastest, because you don't know how far behind Ferrari will be. You don't know how far behind Red Bull will be. You don't know how far behind Mercedes will be. And it just keeps getting better. And like this race was, I thought Leclerc had a great opening stint. He was really, really quick. Built up a nice 5-second lead. And I thought it was Leclerc's race win. I thought this was going to be a dominant Leclerc victory. Somehow, though, in that second stint, Piastri just, I couldn't quite understand. And I'll double check it in my notes, how Piastri got that close to Charles Leclerc, because from what I was seeing, I think Piastri came in like a lap later than the rest, and I don't remember it being like that. So I'm actually going to try and figure out if when everybody pitted, because it does actually confuse me. So yeah, I mean, Leclerc pitted on Piastri pitted on lap 15, and Leclerc pitted on lap 17. So there was actually a 2-lap difference because, of course, there was that stint on the on the mediums when Leclerc was quite comfortably clear. I didn't realise it was that much of a distance. I thought he'd actually closed the gap, actually pitted a lap or so later. So Do you know what though? Fair play to him. Fair play. You can't deny that. But it was just a great race, and yeah, the moves and the fighting that Leclerc and Roscoe were doing, and it's just like when you're seeing it lap after lap after lap. You know, the one thing that you get in Formula One is if you get an overtake for the lead, it's great. You know, we saw Roscoe closing on Leclerc, then he got the DRS, and then he went for it and he made the move. But then to see, despite the fact that Oscar passed him, you know, a lot of times we see an overtake for the lead and it's like, oh my God, we're seeing a battle for the lead. Look at Oscar Piastri's through. And then he goes ahead and builds a gap and it's like, all right, so the McLaren had the pace. And then you know how the race just sort of dials off a bit. You get that excitement of there being a pass for the lead and then it's still kind of there. And then with about 10 or so laps to go, when the gap has been extended, it's almost just fizzles out in a very depressing manner. But it wasn't like this. Leclerc was right in Oscar's DRS zone and he would not let him go. He was constantly there and he was going for the moves on multiple different occasions. He just didn't have enough to get it done because Oscar played his cards absolutely beautifully. And of course, we had then at the end of the race a VSC ending with obviously the crash between Sainz and Perez. I thought I'd cover it now because, I mean, I'll go through every single teams and the drivers as I normally do in these, but I think it was just a very freak accident. I think Sainz has taken the outside of turn 2. I think what Sainz has done is expected to basically get the better drive on Perez on the exit. So obviously Sainz went wide going in towards turn 2 and Perez was on the inside and was nip and tuck alongside him. I think what Sainz expected was that he'd get a better drive because, you know, he'd opened up the corner quicker. He has the DRS like Perez does, but he has the slipstream from Leclerc. And I think maybe he thought, you know, I'll be all right in that situation, so I'm not really too concerned. But none of the drivers turned their steering wheels towards one another. So it was almost just like them driving in a straight line. Like Perez was obviously driving straight, but his car was slightly tilted by at least like a degree or two to the right and Sainz a degree or two to the left. And it was such a slow paced collision. Like, again, there was no one that moved over to try and heavily cover another driver off. They just had a really rare and unfortunate crash. And it's a shame because, especially for Perez, and I'll cover it in the teams in a second, he had a great race weekend. And it's a real shame that he gets that DNF because it definitely could have been a podium. I don't think it would have been the race win, like some people kind of thought. So, and I just don't think he quite had the pace of Leclerc and Piastri. I think he was flattered a little bit by the fact that there was a few laps when Leclerc and Piastri were fighting hard. Like, the gap was getting up to like 2 seconds at some points between them. Then Leclerc would go for a move and then Oscar and Leclerc would have a fight and it would just bring Perez in. And I think that kind of flattered him just a little bit. But it definitely, you know, that doesn't take away from the weekend that Sergio Perez kind of had. And yeah, if this is how the F1 season is going to keep going, then let's keep it going because I love it. I absolutely love it. I'm just so happy to be a Formula One fan right now. I'm so happy, you know, I can go into race weekends being excited, you know, and people that don't know much about Formula One, you can show them good races. You know, the fact is, if somebody was in, you know, you speak to someone in 2023 and you're like, oh, so I'm watching Formula One, and you're like, oh, how's that? Your answer really is shit. It's terrible. Don't watch it. But now you can go on and say, whack that on your TV screens. You know, whack not the Miami Grand Prix, that was kind of rubbish, but like, whack the British Grand Prix on. Get the Hungarian Grand Prix on for some Hamilton Verstappen fighting. Get the Belgian Grand Prix on for some battling. Get the what's it called? The Italian Grand Prix up to see the homegrown, not the homegrown, but you know, the home team of Ferrari winning. Get the Azerbaijan Grand Prix up because this shows you that you can race on the streets if you've got the right track layout for it. And that's something that I think Azerbaijan has had since it came through. It was always labelled Azerbaijan as a very boring layout, a very boring street track. And I remember the first race back in 2016 when Nico Rosberg won the race quite comfortably after Hamilton wasn't really in contention in that race. I'm pretty sure Hamilton had a penalty or something, and then obviously there was the team radio ban, the silly ban that they had for like 4 or 5 races, and then Hamilton had an issue with his power unit, and it was literally down to the fact that he just pressed the wrong button on a steering wheel, but the engineers, or Pete Bonington at the time, couldn't tell him what was wrong on the car, and then Hamilton slipped back and was shouting, and I'm pressing all these buttons, and Pete, you could tell he was so frustrated, not only was Hamilton, but Bono, because it was such a simple thing that he just accidentally pressed, and it was so easy to correct it, but they couldn't do it back then. And that race was really boring, and it really put put Baku under the cosh of, why are we even here? What's the point in this track? It's useless. It's the worst thing in the world. Get rid of it. Then obviously we had 2017, which was an outright classic, and everyone was saying, well, actually, fair play, Baku. You've just pulled a blinder there with obviously the Hamilton-Vettel collision, the Ricciardo triple overtake, the safety cars, the Vettel stop-go penalty, the Hamilton headrest incident, the Ricciardo then winning the race, Bottas taking on Stroll towards the start-finish line. It had it all. And then it had it all again in 2018. And then Baku started to get a better reputation for itself, because all of a sudden then we got two absolute brilliant races, with the Red Bulls crashing in 2018, with Bottas doing the overcut and then boxing under the safety car, Vettel making a heavy lockup and then losing the race win, Bottas then losing the race win because of a puncture, Hamilton inheriting in that. And you're thinking, now it's got some good rep for it. And then again, 2019 was quite poor. There's no doubt about that. And you get those. You get boring races. And I think Baku was just unfortunate that it had such a poor first race that it just struggled to get that rep back. It almost reminded me, Azerbaijan, it reminds me of Star Wars Battlefront 2. It's the weirdest comparison you're going to ever hear me say, right? But Star Wars Battlefront 2, and I'm talking the 2017 game, right, got the worst publicity you could ever have for a pre-launch, not just the launch, but the pre-launch of a game, probably in the history of gaming. It was everywhere about how bad it was because of microtransactions and pay to win. And gambling, in a way, in a sense. And the launch was not that good either. You know, the progression system was poor, and again, it was pay to win, and it just wasn't good. It was terrible. But then it redeemed itself. It took some time away, and it didn't update the game, and they redeemed themselves to the point now where people are desperate, including me, for them to make a third Star Wars Battlefront game. They won't, because EA are probably too scared to do that, and I think their license to create Star Wars games is coming to an end. Could be wrong on that. But it just shows that it's the same with Baku. It's like, never write something off because it gives a bad first impression. Give it a chance. And obviously we've had the chances now at Baku, and it's been incredible. Obviously, like I said, 19 was boring. We didn't go there in 2020. 2021 was an absolute classic. Again, Leclerc with a shock pole, Hamilton with brake magic problem, Verstappen with that puncture, Perez with a shock win, Vettel with a podium. You know, it had it all. And again, you know, we had a brilliant race here. So, moving things on to the teams then, I'm going to start things off with McLaren. Obviously, they were excellent this race weekend. They did everything they could. Obviously, Lando Norris, first of all, I'll give him a shout out. He had a fantastic recovery drive from the back of the grid, basically. P14 or 15, I think it was. I know he qualified 17th because of the yellow flag, which was unfortunate. Ocon had picked up a puncture. Couldn't do anything about it. It's just one of those situations. It's a real shame for Lando, but he put in a very strong and mature performance to recover to P4, I think it was in the end, ahead of Max Verstappen. Now, I know it's not necessarily important for Lando Norris to be ahead of Max Verstappen by at the moment. That's a really weird thing to say, but it's like, in order for Norris to win the championship, he needs to be taking 8 points out of Max per race. So while it's important, while it's key that he's obviously got himself a couple of points back, it means that it makes his average points tally to take away from Max a lot higher. But I don't know. Actually, I'm trying to think about it now. I don't even know why I said it wasn't important to finish in front of Max. I'm an idiot. Anyway, just pretend I never said that. All right, just pretend I never said it. But he put in a great drive. You know, he was really quick on the hard tyres, and when he got past Albon in particular, Verstappen had no answer for him. Verstappen couldn't pass him anyway when Norris was stuck behind Albon and didn't even have DRS. Norris did some good defensive maneuvers. Sainz was able to pass him. Max couldn't. Norris then, obviously on those medium tyres, was able to breeze past Max, get close to Russell, and yeah, he just had a fantastic recovery drive. Again, all the drivers from Norris downwards were flattered by the crash at the end, but you take it when you take it. It happens, and you've got to be in those situations. But for Oscar Piastri, though, that was the drive of a champion. And to have that maturity in him in his second season of Formula One just shows the pure skill that this man's got. You know, Lando Norris has won 2 races in his Formula One career, in Miami and in Zandvoort. He's raced in Formula One now this is his 6th season in Formula One. He's had a lot of years to grow, mature, and understand, he's been in race-winning scenarios before. Don't get me wrong, he's not been in loads of them. He's not been in every single situation, but Monza was a race-winning scenario. in Russia was a race-winning scenario. And, of course, in 2023, he probably didn't really get any race-winning scenarios. Maybe the Qatar Sprint if he qualified correctly. But in 2024, let's not beat around the bush. He's had more time at the front of the field than Piastri has, which is to his own credit, to have that maturity built in. And just naturally, over 6 years of Formula One, you get the maturity in there. But for Oscar, this is his second year in Formula One. He's coming up against Lando Norris, who's clear McLaren #1. He's gone into these races. At the moment, I'm pretty sure he was the highest, the driver that accumulated the most amount of points during the European leg of Formula One from, where are we, Imola to, to Italy, if that Imola was the first European race. Whatever it was, that just shows the level that Oscar's running at. And then to run at this level where, first of all, that overtake was that overtake was, as Palmer, I think it said, was on commentary for F1 TV, it was like a Ricciardo-esque dive bomb. But it also gave me Lewis Hamilton vibes. It reminded me, if you go back and watch it, Google it, Lewis Hamilton's overtake on Kimi Raikkonen at the 2007 Italian Grand Prix. It reminded me of that because he came from such a long way back. And it wasn't one of those where when he was getting close to Leclerc and I saw him move over and then start to outbrake him, 100% honesty now, I thought that he was just trying to have a look. See, just put Leclerc off a little bit. I didn't think he was actually going for it. To then not lock the brakes and also just to let the car roll in there, not run that thing wide, and then hold the position afterwards. That is one of the most brilliant overtakes you will see in Formula One. And it sounds stupid because all he did was use DRS on a long straight and then outbrake him from about half a second back. But I think if you look on the F1 highlights, either on Sky or the F1 YouTube channel, it had, and it was brilliant to have it, was the counter of how many meters back he was from Leclerc. And I'm pretty sure he was a good 30 meters back. So he would have had to have broke a good 40 odd meters after Leclerc would have broked just to get ahead of him in the first place. It was an amazing overtake. And then to defend the way he defended, Leclerc was onto him. Perez was catching him as well. And he positioned the car absolutely perfectly all race long. It was the best race of Oscar Piastri's career. It was a statement win from Oscar, and he thoroughly deserved it because obviously his win in Hungary was so badly overshadowed by Lando Norris and the McLaren team that this was a race win that showed what pure skill that man's got. And he's got so much composure, so much coolant in his mentality, and he's going to win multiple championships. There's no doubt about it. I think he'll win a championship because he's just so talented. He'll win one before Norris. I believe it. When I say that, odds on Norris just wins this year's title because he overtakes Max, and it's just like, what did I say? But yeah, no, it was a brilliant race from him. It was a brilliant race from Ferrari too. Carlos Sainz, first of all, he was quite quiet. He obviously started well, he qualified well, in third, dropped behind Perez, was pretty distant for a lot of the race. And this is the thing with Sainz that I think is a problem for Ferrari. He's a very good qualifier and he can be a very good racer, but there's too many times now where he's just too far back in the races. He just doesn't seem to have that race pace. If you look at Monza, for example, Leclerc managed to win that race, yet Sainz was a good 17, 18 seconds back after it. And, it was McLaren, Ferrari. So it wasn't if Sainz, had lots of cars in his way, like say Hamilton got in front of him and it may have made a bit more sense. It was literally that he was way behind. And the same in Baku. He lost at the start to Perez, which is absolutely fair enough. But the key thing is Perez was able to keep up with the front two. Sainz wasn't. And it's becoming a problem. And it's just a tough one. It is a tough one. Don't get me wrong, he's not as a great racer as, Leclerc and Oscar in terms of pace outright. But we just seeing the Sainz from the start of the year that was comfortably quicker than Leclerc to seeing him now. I mean, don't get me wrong, when you're doing developments on a car, they're going to suit one or the other. And to be honest, they will do more to help suit Charles Leclerc moving forwards because ultimately he is the man that's staying with the team and Hamilton's also coming into Ferrari. So I get that. But he just needs to try and find a way to be a bit more competitive in the race, and it's going to help Ferrari because Ferrari are 31 points behind Red Bull in the Constructors' Championship. It's definitely on for Ferrari to usurp Red Bull, and I still believe they will and finish second in the championship behind McLaren, who are now in the lead for the first time since the 2014 Australian Grand Prix. Yes, it's been that long, but he just needs to get it in there. And as I said, it was a super unlucky collision with Sergio Perez, but at least he kept his tyres in better check than Leclerc compared to Sainz on the hard tyres. But obviously Leclerc was pushing like mad to get in there. For Red Bull, it was a shocking race weekend for Verstappen, a great race weekend for Perez. It was one that he needed, one to build his confidence. I know Red Bull were very tempted to drop him, but Red Bull are now starting to blame the upgrades from... This was interesting. They started to blame the upgrades from 2023 at Barcelona for their problems that they're suffering now, which is when Perez conveniently started to struggle. Obviously, Max is now struggling as well. I don't really know if I buy it, to be honest. Maybe, in terms of their development direction, but I think so much has changed on the car since the Barcelona Grand Prix in 2023 to now, to then only now say, actually, hang on, it's got to be because of that. It's a bit strange. It could be true, but I don't fully believe it. But it's a great race from Perez, and I think Red Bull will look back on it and think, do you know what? We actually did a good job at keeping Perez in the team and seeing how he gets on at two races that he's been immaculate at, which is Azerbaijan and Singapore. Because obviously here in Baku, he was quicker than Verstappen last year at Baku. Probably the only track that he genuinely had outright merit pace versus Verstappen. And here this time around, he did the same thing. He was quicker in practice. He was quicker in qualifying. First time he's out-qualified Verstappen this season. And he was comfortably faster than him in the race. As for Max, it looked like he blamed something on the setup and going in a different direction, but he was lost all weekend. And it was weird to see it. It really was weird, just seeing Verstappen nowhere near. And to be honest, for me, that was his worst race weekend of the 2024 season. Don't get me wrong, he's finished lower in races this year. I think Monza he finished in 6th, but he should have been a comfortable P7 had it not been for the crash with Perez and Sainz. And it's a real shame for Perez, because like I said, he's had such a great weekend. He would have taken that as a good motivational boost for himself, and it's been taken away from him. So hopefully Red Bull can sort of give him that support to show you really worked your ass off this weekend and you put in a shift. So, take it on the chin and something like that. Mercedes were pretty lost this race weekend. They obviously decided to run their old floor for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. So they've been running the new spec floor that they introduced in Spa and got rid of it at the last two races at Zandvoort and the Italian Grand Prix. They weren't really happy with it. They seemed to have the downforce that they needed generated for this upgrade to generate. However, they didn't have the balance, so they went back to the old floor. They say that both floors specs are very similar, so that is a bit of a concern for them. Apparently, they're going to be running the old floor spec again in Singapore. Obviously, it's a completely different circuit. A lot of heavy braking zones, but I think the Mercedes car seems to have a pure strength, and it has a clear weakness, and I guess that's something that Mercedes can look at and improve on and build with, because if you look at it, the tracks like Silverstone and Spa, and I guess Barcelona, because they were pretty decent around there, are tracks that very much suit the Mercedes car. They love a track which is high speed, which has got fast flowing corners and not many heavy braking zones and 90-degree corners. They seem to be where Mercedes struggle a lot. Like Monza, for example, it kind of would suit them. I know they were decent in the final sector, but when you've got heavy braking zones into multiple chicanes, it doesn't quite work for them. Same in Baku. Yes, there's a long straight, but it's a lot of heavy braking zones and into 90-degree corners and tricky traction zones that you've got to get on the power straight afterwards, whereas stuff like Silverstone, where it's just free-flowing, works with the car. So I guess it's something that they can use as a direction. I think the other thing that Mercedes will probably look at, and I think the reason why they've gone from a team that won 3 of the 4 races from the Austrian Grand Prix to the Belgian Grand Prix was because A, the track suited them, but I think B as well, because because B and then A, but because obviously they fine-tuned their car from running the updates. But crucially as well is, whilst they were then developing to keep the gap close between themselves and the front runners. They then hit a stumbling block, and every team's done it. I mean, look at Red Bull. They started the season so well, and then all of a sudden, they're now in a bit of a troublesome area where they're testing out different pieces, and they've got a new floor, and they're trying to fix things. Same with McLaren. They didn't start the season too brilliantly. Brought a raft of upgrades, they worked. Brought another raft of upgrades, they worked. Ferrari started the season as the second best behind Red Bull. Then they brought a raft of upgrades and they completely slumped. They brought a new raft of upgrades come Italy and they're back on form again. Mercedes started poorly, brought a set of upgrades, they worked. Brought another little bits, or basically brought multiple little mini bits of upgrades, they all worked. Then, as they were going upwards, they then found their stumbling block. And that's what every team is struggling in this rule set era, is just they're able to bring upgrades to close the gap. They're not able to bring upgrades to sustain the gap that they're closing. And the key thing for Mercedes is if that floor worked, I have no doubt the Mercedes would be right there fighting at the front with the Ferraris, Red Bulls and the McLarens. The problem is that because Mercedes' floor upgrade hasn't worked, you need to remember that McLaren brought a raft of upgrades to the Dutch Grand Prix. They worked. Ferrari brought a raft of upgrades to the Italian Grand Prix. They worked. So then when Mercedes have brought a set of upgrades themselves and they haven't worked, you're not going to expect them to still be at the front when they didn't quite have the outright fastest car anyway. So it's going to be tricky for them. It'll be tricky for them again in Singapore. It's not a track that will suit Mercedes, so they just have to ride out this difficult period. And then it'll get to the key race in Austin in 3 weeks after the Singapore Grand Prix, where A, it'll be a fast-flowing circuit, which will suit the Mercedes, but obviously B, because there's a 3-week gap, there'll be all the front-running teams will probably bring their last major upgrade packages to that race. I think Mercedes have already said that they'll be running the old floor further, which they did in Azerbaijan and in Singapore, and then they're bringing an entirely brand new floor to the US Grand Prix, which makes sense, and that's how they're going to run it. Now, I want to give a shout out to Aston Martin. First of all, well done for signing Adrian Newey, because that's terrifying. But also to Fernando Alonso, because he did a great job in qualifying, got himself into the top 10, and he finished in P6 as well, which I didn't actually realise, but he did. So fair play to him. He was completely under the radar, but he put in an excellent performance for Aston Martin, and they probably could have done with it. So I added it in my notes. Stroll was poor as usual, but Alonso put in a great performance, and I kind of wanted to put that in there. Little quick one in there. Next up was Williams. They were outstanding this weekend, and so too was Franco Colapinto. And I'm going to mix that in with Haas, who also had a good race weekend. It was Haas v Williams, and Oliver Bearman also put in a fantastic race debut ×2 for Haas this time, though, not for Ferrari, because he outqualified Nico Hülkenberg, and then he beat him in the race and scored points. So you've got to give him credit. Oliver Bearman has put in a brilliant performance, and it just shows that he's definitely deserves his seat in Formula One next year. And I actually think Franco Colapinto is currently... I don't think he deserves a seat in Formula One just yet. There needs to be a bit more consistency. The problem that we've got is that even though I know Audi are looking into Colapinto as well as... I can't remember the guy's name. He's currently top of the F2 Championship, so just Google the F2 Championship and you'll see who it is. But Colapinto, I mean, the crash in FP1 was a bit worrying, kind of gave a bit Logan Sargent vibes, but he got himself through into Q3. He outqualified Alex Albon, who, funnily enough, had, obviously with the fan, just air intake just left in the car. That was kind of funny to see. But he outqualified Albon, which is something that Sargent could basically never do. And then he scored points, which is something that Sargent could never do. And this is why Williams got rid of Sargent. They needed somebody to score points, because this double points finish, I believe, has jumped them in front of, I want to say Haas in the championship. I don't think, I could be wrong, but they've jumped in front of somebody in the championship. You'll have to let me know who that is. I think it's Alpine that they jumped in front. I'll see if I can get it up at the same time. But to go from having a crash in FP1 and then to keep your focus and your composure going up until that moment, it is, a super impressive performance from him. And it just shows that he's got speed, and he had some great fights in there and was doing the work. So, what was it? Williams they jumped in front of Alpine. My apologies in there. So, yeah, that's the key. But that's key. That's what Williams needed, was somebody in there to get the points, to work with Albon, to work with the team, to get them the points, to jump them in front of these constructors. So, fair play to him. That is something that he will like. So yeah, fair play to all of them. And unfortunately for RB, didn't quite work out for them. Tsunoda with the massive side pod damage after Stroll made contact with him on lap 1, which obviously resulted in his puncture. Sauber are just the worst team on the grid. They can only do what they can do. And Alpine were pretty meh. Slightly better in terms of Gasly, I suppose. But again, flattered by the fact that there was the crash late on. And that's kind of the teams that are not really relevant. So I don't really speak about them too much. But next off, obviously, we've got the Singapore Grand Prix. I obviously do expect McLaren to be the favourites. I do think Red Bull will be in trouble. It is a track that defeated them last year, the only track that did so. They're not good over the bumps. They're not good over the curbs, high curbs. However, the one thing that Red Bull will have in their locker is understanding and knowledge of what went wrong last year, what went wrong at Monaco, and just what makes their car suffer a lot over the curbs. So maybe they can get something right. And obviously, Red Bull will most likely bring their high downforce package, which is obviously the high down, basically the cannon beamed engine covers gone. So maybe having that high downforce package will allow a bit more for them, but who knows? But we'll have to wait and see. But guys, if you have enjoyed the video, feel free to drop it a like, subscribe if you're new around here as well, and I'll catch you guys for the next F1 debate after the Singapore Grand Prix. Take care all, peace.